I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipal Valenza.
I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
I'm Angelique Preston.
We need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is What's Next, a dedicated hour to have important conversations about the issues facing the marginalized and underrepresented communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario.
We're going to have some real healing. We've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truth.
What's Next continues our mission to discuss race,
Equity,
And the common concerns of Buffalo's East Side and beyond.
In the suburban area, everywhere, we must work and teach our children.
Today on What's Next, we're talking with Stephanie Peete. Stephanie is a Director of Workforce Development at Say Yes to Education Buffalo, but she has also, most recently in the last year or so, got herself into a small business, and it's one of my favorite kind of businesses, Bookstore. She is the co-owner of Second Chapter Bookstore here in Buffalo. Thanks for joining us, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Jay. I appreciate being able to speak.
Love to talk, and I most certainly love talking about books. First, right off the bat, what was the motivation, the inspiration about starting Second Chapter?
So reading has always been something like super important in my family, in my household. My grandmother was an avid reader. My mom is a retired educator, and if anyone's ever had a parent as a teacher, there's always homework. Like, it's never like, oh, we got a homework-free week. She's like, no, here's your homework. And my mom was really big on reading, so and she'll deny this because she still does, but she used to make me read a book a week.
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa.
And then when she thought I wasn't telling the truth about reading it, she used to make me write a book report at the end. So, like, reading was always, very critical in our household. My mom was very intentional about making sure there were, like, Black authors, Black narratives in our house to just, make sure that I came out into the world with a sense of, pride in who I am and our community and our culture. So that's part of it. And then a few years ago, I was watching a TV show called Single Parents. You probably haven't seen it because nobody did because it was canceled after 3 seasons. But I liked watching the show. But there was a Black woman on it, and her name, I think, was Poppy. But she had a wine brewery is what she called it. So it was like a feminist bookstore where you can come and also just like have a glass of wine with your friends. And I was like, that's really cool. Like, if we had that here, like, that's someplace I would go to. So I told my mom about it. We went out to dinner one night, and I told her, and she was like, oh, that's a really cool idea. Like, we were just talking about it and super excited at dinner, but then life just, you get busy and you put it away on a shelf. But then my mom decided to retire, and she literally called me and was like, hey, I'm about to retire. Come over on Monday. We're going to start the bookstore. And, like, that was how
It sounds like your mother is not a person you say no to.
Yeah,
often.
But I'm glad that was her approach, because for me, I was always, like, second-guessing myself, and I was very, like, anxious about doing it. Like, is this, I don't know, will people want to, support it, and, would this work here? But she was really the driving force to getting it started.
I want to get into the bookstore, but since you kind of stumbled into this about your early at-home education when it came to reading and reading Black authors, what authors were along the way that maybe particularly influenced you, that you even maybe today, because it sounds like you started this fairly young, that are still standing with you right now?
One of my favorite childhood books is actually Tyra Beach. And Faith Ringgold did the illustrations for that. We actually we have that book on our site right now. I found it because I'm like, the kids nowadays need to see this book. But I was the type of kid that I would read things I had no business reading because I would get bored with the things that were supposedly for my age. I remember I was like 10 or 11, and I read Mama by Terry McMillan because it was in my mom's like her work area. Completely inappropriate for a 10 or 11-year-old. But, so I would, anything I can get my hands on, I read.
Yeah.
Yeah. So early on, I started reading, Terry McMillan and Maya Angelou, and anything, like literally anything I can get my hands on. If it was around, I would read it.
How early did you get into Toni Morrison? Or is that
Toni Morrison was probably more like high school and college. Yeah.
A little more challenging.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Even now, challenging.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we're actually going to read, I haven't announced yet, but we do our coffee chats. Usually about once a month at Unapologetic Coffee, and I wanted to start the year moving forward with reading some of the classics, and we're going to read something by Toni Morrison.
Excellent. So, Second Chapter Bookstore. So that, in essence, the big focus is here is to get these books, to encourage people to find the books. All Black authors or mainly Black authors?
Primarily Black authors,
Okay.
but the entire focus is like Black history and culture. So we do have books written by non-Black folks who are talking about something significant within, history and providing some context. But everything is focused on Black history, the celebration of Blackness across the diaspora. And we do have some books, with some intersectionality. So we do a lot of Afro-Latina writers. It's just exploring what Blackness looks like beyond the U.S. and what we see too.
Okay. And then you encourage this by putting together different events. Like you start off with that, let's have a glass of wine thing, which really got my attention. Boy, they should have done that for me when I was in college. But let's talk about those events and how they really right off the bat. How did it go the first try? For you?
So our first one was our biggest. So we launched our bookstore with our book club experience, what we generally describe it as. So you buy a ticket, we mail you the book in advance, and then when you come, there's cocktails, there's food, sometimes there's a DJ, and each one has a different theme, and we have folks who, either myself or some colleagues or some friends in the community, will actually facilitate the discussion, just because we know some people are a little intimidated about reading a book and talking about it, or maybe they didn't get a chance to read the book, but they can still participate in some of the major themes.
Okay.
So that's one thing that we do. We've done a few this
So
year.
you're not going to yell at somebody because they didn't do their homework.
No, it's totally fine. I've done a lot of book discussions even before this, and most people don't read the book, so I come in knowing that.
Right.
So we just pull the major themes and make it relatable and move forward with that. We also do coffee chats and unapologetic coffee. Those are completely free. You don't have to buy the book from us. Great if you want to, but if you want to borrow from the library or you're a Kindle person, what have you, we just want folks to come together and talk.
Mm-hmm.
So those are free. We do them about once a month normally at Unapologetic Coffee, and those are really intimate, so 12 people or less. And it's really, someone described it as a sacred space recently, which I truly, I'm honored.
Yeah.
But it usually becomes, we usually stop talking about the book at some point, and we just start talking as human beings and our lived experience, and it's a really healing space, and I'm very thankful for it. And then most recently, actually this past Wednesday, we did a book discussion with tweens, so 10 to 12-year-olds. That was a suggestion from Juaria over at BNMC. Her son actually wanted to do it, so he came up with him and his brother came with a long list of topics. I was like, okay, what about climate change? That's something that, most kids, especially with what they're seeing, they can relate to that. So we had 3 kids who read the book. We did a prep session with them, so I gave them the questions and they practiced. And then we did the actual live event on Wednesday, which was the most adorable thing.
Yeah.
But it's really cool because we see a lot of excitement around children's books, but unless we run into someone who just has a 10 to 12-year-old who just loves to read, we don't sell a lot of tween books. They're on their phones, social media, video games. They kind of lose that love for books. So that's something we definitely want to continue. Yeah, it is crushing.
Yeah. What was the book?
Saving Earth.
Okay.
And it was about fighting for climate change and saving our future. Yeah.
Yeah. And what were, like you said, it was adorable. What did you hear from the kids?
They took it really seriously. They had their questions in advance, and they actually studied. They talked about redlining and its impact on the climate, on our climate, and climate change. They talked about methods to reduce your carbon footprint and how to talk to adults in your life and so they can take you seriously. So they really did a great job at capturing some of the major parts of the book for their peers.
Wow. Yeah. Redlining and its impact on climate change. Mm-hmm. That's pretty heavy stuff for a 10 to 12-year-old.
Yeah, they took it very seriously.
Wow. That's very encouraging.
Yeah.
You gotta really feel good about bringing that conversation together. Let's talk about some of the other books. You have one right here in front of us. On this one you haven't had.
We haven't had a discussion. We're planning something in January.
This
hopefully.
is called?
White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide by Carol Anderson, who's a phenomenal scholar. We actually read a book
from her earlier in the year at one of our coffee chats. It's called The Second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America. Yeah, I highly recommend that book. This one is actually, the premise is that though white people who subscribe to white supremacy and want to uphold it, their true issue with black people is not merely just their existence, but the idea that they want to live with dignity and ambition. Which is...
What is the... I hear that, and I hear you saying that, and what... I mean, does she explore what is at the root of that? Is it just their problems with their own
Right.
self-esteem, and they don't want by
it-
putting someone else down makes them feel better? I don't understand
it's in
that.
a nutshell, feeling that black people are not equal to white people. Like, how dare you want to live in the same neighborhood as me? How dare you think you can attend school with my children? You know what I mean? How dare you think you can work with me or be my supervisor? Like, and she goes through and through different areas of history. Like, she goes through education, she goes through like civil rights to see how they have worked to snatch away any progress. So any vehicle that allowed for black progress, they dismantled it.
Right. Wow. And I mean, does she talk about numbers of people that might subscribe to that fall into that, or is it just about how that portion of opinion, or whatever you want to call it, has influenced the overall conversation in America?
I mean, she does go through some stats. There was one, it was shortly after the Civil Rights Act was passed. Over 60% of white people surveyed felt that black people were getting rights too fast.
Too fast.
Too fast.
The right to
Like,
vote was too
yeah,
fast.
you should get a trickle. You shouldn't get, so I mean, when you
Sorry
think
for
of something
laughing.
like that, I mean, that's a pretty powerful
Right.
sentiment that, and again, it's how dare you think you should live with dignity and ambition.
How do you when you're reading something like this, how do you keep your emotions in check?
I actually find this, so I actually don't read things like this normally. I read to escape. So I like give me a good old novel. And I have to deal with this, during my full-time life, like having to, be really entrenched in equity issues. So for me, reading is an escape. But what this does is it gives me more tools in my toolbox to have conversation with people. So I look at it as necessary.
Okay.
So, so I, do a few novels, then get back to something serious, and then, I try to balance it out. I read based on how I'm feeling.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, you're able to
Yeah.
separate yourself because you
Yeah.
believe you need to have an understanding of
Oh,
what's
absolutely. I
at
think it's
work
absolutely
here.
critical. And I tell people all the time, like, you need to understand the history, because we all think we do, and we don't. Even though I read things like this, I'm still, I'm constantly unlearning and replacing that with what actually happened.
It's interesting because obviously because of your mother. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're a tremendously well-read individual. A book a week. My goodness. Are you? And I think I know the answer to this, but I'd like you to maybe explore it a little bit. When you were younger and you were reading books, you probably had an understanding of of racism and how America worked. But doesn't it seem like the scholarship now is really kind of unearthing a whole new conversation and an understanding of what's at work here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're having more progressive conversation, more honest conversations with younger kids. And I think that's really important because, I mean, most of us went our whole lives and either in college or at some other point in adulthood, we ran into something that kind of like clicked the light bulb on, and then we started doing the work. But I think it's happening with kids, and I think that's so powerful, and I think that's why you see so many folks trying to, again, dismantle that.
Right. Yeah. We were talking before we went on the air about a book that I was sent by a Canisius professor of How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith, and it was the same idea that talking about. I won't get into all of it. I mean, first of all, I'm part of the world's worst book reviewer, but just the idea that how certain legacies have been allowed to exist just because that was the accepted approach to history, and how that has had a damaging effect still today, all these years, after the Civil War and such like that. It is interesting to see how there are scholars out there who are unearthing not just new information, but new perspectives on this topic.
Yeah.
It really is interesting. So that's what is at the heart of a lot of what your book clubs are about and your book events.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just a good old like celebration of Blackness. So it's not just history. It's just we're reading a Black perspective and having a good time with it.
Yeah,
I think there's.
Can you give me a book
for joy.
example of that? Or
so we started with a book called Black Joy, and it was stories of resistance, resilience, and restoration. And it's a collection of essays. And while she did address, racism and, gun violence and its impact on our communities, she also talked about how to cultivate joy and how we maintain it and how it's necessary to like fiercely protect it as Black people. So, I mean, we normally pick books sometimes based on something that I've read that I thought was phenomenal. Or someone will suggest a book, and then I check it out, and I'm like, yeah, this is really great. I think other people will like it too, and that's just how we do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The celebration of Black joy. I can recall one guest coming in here talking a little bit about that very topic. That's something that does not always get the spotlight it deserves.
Yeah. I mean, that's how you're able to read stuff like this and not like go into a dark place because you still, you have this internal joy that you still have, and you protect it and you nurture it, so that it sustains you through the not so joyous moments.
Not so joyous moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sustains you through the hard work.
Yes, right. You were saying also about white rage and books like this, how they become a tool in your toolbox when you go out and you're doing your work for Say Yes, which focuses on workforce development. How does that come into play? Can you maybe give me an example of where you encountered a situation where all of a sudden you found yourself needing to kind of recount some information and an understanding and an argument about things that came into play. Can you talk about that?
So I will say the employers that we work with, because they know our work is rooted in racial equity, they're coming to the table with the right intention.
Mindset,
so it thankfully for us, it hasn't been as much of as a back and forth with folks.
You're not pulling teeth.
Right, but what this does do, it helps us root our own work in data. And I think a lot of times when we talk about equity, folks, they don't see it. If they don't have an intimate perspective of it, they don't notice it. But when you talk about the data locally and what it looks like, and you help paint that picture, then they see what the issues are, and then you're inviting them to help take part in the solution. So that's what reading these type of books helps me to do. It helps me to be focused on the data. It helps me to tell a story. And then we say, this is our role in fixing this and, creating a different future for the kids in the city and the community. And we invite you, and here's your part. So let's work together and figure this out. Yeah.
I'd like to know more about that, about, how you utilize that data and you build that story. Stay with us. There's more to come. This is What's Next on WBFO.
Hi, I'm Christina. I love exploring the world around me, and I have behind-the-scenes VIP tickets to some of the most exciting places and people in Western New York. And you can come along with me from wherever you are. Let's go! A new series you can watch on WNED PBS, the Buffalo Toronto Public Media YouTube channel, and on PBS Learning Media nationwide.
So let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go!
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app, and we will work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email us using whatsnext@wbfo.org. Together we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
We're talking with Stephanie Peete, Director of Workforce Development at Say Yes Buffalo, and also the co-owner of Second Chapter Bookstore. So let's talk about that then. I like the way that you framed it. There's a story there that needs to be understood about how racial inequity is impacting this community, or how it has impacted it. So give me the narrative, for lack of a better term, of how, tell me the story. Tell me the story of how racial inequity is failing or is hurting this community.
Yeah, I mean, we know, well, most people know the stats, around 85% of Black people in the city live east of Main Street. The isolation index for white people in our community is over 90%, meaning you're going to work, you're coming home and not having true organic engagement and relationships with folks who do not look like you. Our school district, 81% of our young people identify as people of color. There are over 100 languages spoken in our school district. But when you go to most of our major employers in the area, that's not what it looks like. So we paint that picture to employers so they can understand that you can come with the right intentions, but if you're not well equipped, then it's not going to work. And that's where we're trying to get. We're trying to help with the being equipped to create inclusive spaces for young people of color to be able to identify and challenge the policies that you have in your organization that may have perpetuated inequity. And that's like a tough pill to swallow, but
Sure.
As a society, we have to swallow that pill.
Right,
even
right.
like you see a lot of companies and even like cities and municipalities getting rid of the degree requirement for roles.
Okay.
I mean, that was put in place for a reason. It was not a qualifier. It was actually a disqualifier. We want.
I guess I never thought about that.
We're keeping people. You know what I mean?
Right,
but it's
right.
like you have to look. You can't assume that you did everything right. You have to be able. You have to be willing to be vulnerable and have a critical conversation. A critical eye, and say, what could we be doing better? Like, where is there space to grow? Where is there space to challenge? And I think when you focus on data, it helps to eliminate the finger pointing because it's just like, look, this is what's happening, and like, what are we going to do about it? Like,
Right.
This is what our community looks like. How do we fix it?
Right. So, you use the term, help them have the tools that they need to become a more inclusive organization and to benefit from having different perspectives and different talents. So what I mean, probably different employers are different, right? But what are some of those tools that they can use or should be utilizing to try to create this type of space?
Yeah, I mean, even when you think about interviewing young people, so we actually have we had a High Road fellow from Cornell a few years ago. Her name was Libby. She did a study on connecting students of color to corporate internships, and she had a list of recommendations. There were things like even interviewing off-site. When you think about a young person of color, especially Black and Latino kids, coming into a corporate space where no one looks like them, you're already nervous. Like, nobody likes to interview.
Sure.
Interviewing is
Yeah,
terrible.
right,
I never
right.
want to go on one ever
That's
again in my
universal.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah, but to be a kid, so there's already that power dynamic, right? You're a kid. This is probably somebody with a ton of education and experience. Then it's the power structure of this is a super white environment, and this is not what I'm used to. So even like going off site and having like doing interviews like in the community when you're trying to like actively recruit young people, making sure that there are people who look like them involved in the interview process. So using like, maybe a panel of folks. So it could be more conversational style. With our Modern Youth Apprenticeship work in our first year when we did interviews, my colleague, Johanna, who leads our education work, she actually had a suggestion for employers that kind of like changed the game that year.
Really?
So we were wondering, like, how do we get the kids appropriate clothes for interviews, right? Like, logistically, like, we have to figure out, are we going to take them? Are we going to...
Right. Okay.
That's a lot when you're talking about over 100 kids for an interview. But instead, she said, how about we just tell the employers, like, listen, assume that they're coming in the best that they have. They're kids. We just came through the pandemic. Now everybody can fit their clothes.
Right.
They're kids. They might not have money for, a brand new outfit. Sometimes, we have a ton of refugee and new American kids. Sometimes they're coming culturally in something that would be
Right.
appropriate, interview ready from their own perspective and culture. So let's just assume that they're coming in their best. And how about we accept that? And what it did for employers, they actually came casual too to our interview day. It kind of like freed them also of these like rigid standards of professionalism,
Right.
using air quotes. That, I mean, we know who established these.
Right.
We know who established these guidelines. It wasn't anybody who looked like me. But it freed them up, too,
And
to
certainly
just
wasn't anybody dressed like me.
be less
Yeah.
worried about what
Right.
you're wearing and be able to focus on the conversation and getting to know them and see if they're a good fit for the role.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's
And and the results?
It was great. They loved it. I mean, we still had some kids who came in, a suit and tie, but we also had kids who were able to just come and just interview and be comfortable.
And you could tell it made a difference.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And have we been able to see how it's been personified then in these internships? I mean, are we seeing kids?
Yeah, we're seeing folks who are, just being a little bit more open-minded when we're talking about getting young people into the workforce.
Right.
And yeah.
And the kids are, I guess that's the question is, so more kids maybe are now getting into those spots, winning those interviews for lack of a better
fewer
term?
barriers, and it's just a mindset shift. That's all it takes. Just having the conversation, saying, "Oh yeah, that it could work that way too. It doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah,
this also works."
Yeah.
So it's like eliminating barriers that we've subscribed to. A lot of these things we just simply subscribe to.
Right. Exactly. Right. I mean, if I was going to have an interview,
we didn't decide it. We just, we grew up.
You have to. This
is what an interview outfit looks like. But when you look at it, like it. Who dresses like that, especially when you talk about communities of color, or you see vibrant prints and colors and jewelry and all these things you see in indigenous communities across the world. But yeah, you're supposed to come into an interview with your pearls and your
tie,
your tight black skirt. Yeah, it's just why do we do this? Yeah.
Well, I wish they would have done that for me like 50 years ago, but that's another story. What else though? That's a great insight. Mm-hmm. That is an incredible insight about. Like you said, how can a barrier be broken down? And that's a great way of taking something that's very simple and basic, like an interview, and eliminating, for lack of a better term, a tradition that's just what we do, how we have done things. What else? Are there other examples like that you can share with me?
Yeah, so we just talk about onboarding and how often it's not student friendly. It isn't student informed at all, or young people informed.
Okay, just onboarding meaning?
For a new job.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so when you think about it,
so bringing somebody in.
I mean, onboarding is never fun for most people. It's just, you learn all the policies, you sign a bunch of forms.
You're bringing up nightmares for me.
Right. But like making it, fun and engaging and thinking about it as a young person, not you right now in your role, but like taking things and flipping it on its head a bit to make young people more comfortable. It really is about comfortability for a lot of young people. They have the desire, they have the passion, they want to work, they want to support themselves and their families, but a lot of times we're stuffing them into these super outdated boxes. So it's like, how do we change things and put them at the center and design for them, and also using their voice. So as much as possible, we try to actually infuse youth voice. How do you feel about this? What do you think about this? Like getting their honest feedback, and then we change things up based on that.
What's a misnomer about a young person from employer standpoint? I mean, like we talked about before, talking about the books and such, about once that phone gets into the hand, it becomes a big part of who they are. I would think for employers it's kind of a negative, but it's a rally. But what other misnomers are there about?
I mean, that they don't want to work, and the thing is, they want work that matters. They want to feel like they're contributing something. They want to be paid well, and they want to feel like their whole person is respected and included. Not just the fact that they're just an employee, but their entire identity. They want to be acknowledged, and they want to feel like they're wanted in that space.
Right.
So it sounds a little fuzzy, for folks who haven't been, maybe that hasn't been their experience in the workplace. Like you go to work, you do your job, clock out, and go home. But these kids, they don't want that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's a great insight for sure. What about the other side of the coin, though? I can imagine that there are employers who are hearing this or hearing these types of conversations. Well, how does it help my bottom line? What do I get out of being more inclusive? I mean, it's nice to be a good corporate neighbor and and all that. I mean, and that's, but a lot of people are interested in the bottom line. Will this help my bottom line?
Yeah, it will, because when you'll have people who want to work there and they tell their friends, like, over the next 10 years, our region is going to need 160,000 jobs. Most will require some form of post-secondary education. And we can try as much as we want to. We're not going to recruit 160,000 people to move to Buffalo. We're a smaller market. It's just not. It's not going to happen. We have to grow our own. So when you think about creating inclusive spaces for these young people to work, they tell their friends, and then their family members, and they become a referral source for you. So you get folks who want to work and who can grow in your company, but then they literally help you recruit, because who doesn't do that? Like, I was recruited to say yes from a friend.
Oh, is that
who
right?
was there. Yeah,
Okay.
but I mean, that's word of mouth is so powerful.
That's
so
true.
you're getting talent, getting them super early. They have ties here, so the likelihood that they'll stay here are increased versus folks who are, being recruited into the area, and this might just be a pit stop for them. But then you tap into their entire network if you're a great employer.
Right. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's a great way of thinking about it. What about the types of jobs that we're talking about around here? The one thing that, again, this is anecdotal, and you probably know this better than I do, when it comes to workforce development, the one area that seems to be lacking in terms of applicants are the trades, right? There seems to be a big gap in there. How is that being addressed?
So for us, we've been focused on advanced manufacturing, business operations, and IT. In our modern youth apprenticeship work, we are looking at how to work closer with the trades. For us, what we're seeing is that a lot of folks have been, I'll speak as a Black woman,
Please.
is go to college.
Right.
Like for me, when I was finishing high school, there was no other option.
Right.
It was go to college.
Graduate from City Honors has been
Right.
in a book
My
a
mother-
week for her whole life.
My mother
You're
was
going to college.
You're going, like it was that, and that has been. And higher education still is the vehicle for, getting into a career and being able to thrive and create wealth. And especially for Black people, that is kind of like that North Star. Like, you're going to go to college, and we tend to not look at certain career fields as viable, including like manufacturing and trades. Just personal experience from my own life and just talking to some of my family members and friends who have kids who are getting ready to go to college. And I'm like, hey, it doesn't have to be that way, though. There are these other professions. There are other ways to approach higher education. I know for our modern youth apprenticeship work, we combine on-the-job learning. They're getting paid for it with some higher ed coursework. So we're just saying, yeah, you can still go to college. This is a different way, though.
Great.
Part-time,
Right.
work, earn money, and get into a really great career. But I think a lot of it has been like emotionally driven. Like, you're going to go to college. And we all know that college doesn't always.
No, it's not always.
Because you're making a decision at 18 and you don't know how that actually aligns with the real world, and
you're
what you're going to be able to
40
make.
years of broadcasting. Trust me, I know exactly what you're saying there.
So yeah, I think a lot of it has been emotionally driven, and we look at the trades and blue collar roles a lot of times as something less than.
Right.
And I'm like, most of these guys making more money than me with no
absolutely.
college debt.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I think it's just a reframing of and for folks to make decisions based off of labor market data. Like, this is what this role can be. This is what you can make doing this type of work and seeing the honor in it. So
is
reframe
that
it.
resonating? Is that message resonating with young people? Yeah.
It's starting to, but it's going to take some time. But
Right.
I think they're motivated by being able to earn a good living and experience things and be able to live a balanced life. So I think when we start to show them, like, well, this is what this role makes, they're like, oh, really?
Right.
Yeah. So
What about then, though, on the other side of the coin, though? We're talking about going to places where people, do they look like me? You're going to the corporate power office, and we have those images of who those people are going to be coming down. What about in the trades? Is there also that kind of separation going on? I just wonder about how these, job sites and things like that work for people of color, and if there are, the types of inclusive, environments that are needed to really attract those types of workers.
Those issues still exist in the trades too. We haven't directly worked with the trades just yet, so
Gotcha.
that
So
hasn't
you're
been
right.
our experience. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's something that we are looking into, because we've had requests, because they're like, hey, these are great careers. We're having a hard time reaching these kids. So
Okay.
yeah, that's definitely something that's in
So
our
it's a
plans
bridge
for
that still
moving
needs to be
forward.
crossed to a certain
Absolutely.
extent. Okay. All right, very good. Thanks for joining us today. This is What's Next on WBFO. More to come right after this.
Attention parents and teachers. Find free learning resources, including lesson plans and videos for all ages at pbslearningmedia.org.
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app, and we will work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email us using whatsnext@wbfo.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
Stephanie Peete is our guest this morning on What's Next, having a great conversation because Stephanie has she has her hands in a lot of very important things. She's the director of workforce development for Say Yes to Education in Buffalo, but also the co-owner of Second Chapter Bookstore, recently opened here in Buffalo. And I love talking about books, so I'm most certainly enjoying this. Stephanie, on one of the local websites, I'll give it credit, WIVB. A beautiful article written with you at the center of it from, I think it was maybe last August, so August of 2022. And, you were quoted in there on some different things. And one of the things you suggested is, and a lot of it was a reflection on May 14th, stay angry. We need to stay angry. I've been sitting here with you for the last hour. You seem like the least angry person there is. But what about that? I mean, expand on that emotion of that time.
Yeah.
Has it faded?
I don't think it has. It might not be on the front page of the news anymore, but it's still there. And for me, I might not seem like it. There is always like an undercurrent of a little anger as a Black woman, and,
Sure.
and the things that we still have to navigate and dismantle in order for there to actually be equity in our society. So for me, that's kind of like the fire that keeps all of this going still. So
Yeah.
there's, like I talked earlier about, still maintaining your joy. You can have both. And I am always a little angry. It's just, you have to, the way you communicate it is what's important. And that's how you have to pull people in. If I'm walking around visibly upset and, audibly angry all the time, you don't build any bridges. You don't build relationships that way. But there is always an undercurrent of me being truly upset about something. And that's what fuels all of this work.
How do you talk about drawing people in? I appreciate you being honest about and open about the anger that's always there. The other side of the coin, you feel like you have to subsume that to a certain extent to help build bridges and things like that. What do you use for techniques? What do you have when it comes to building bridges? That's a great way of describing it.
Honestly, a lot of it is just through books. Like, I literally recommend a book, and then folks are like, oh, yeah, I read it. And I'm like, okay, you want to talk about it? And, like, let's meet for coffee. So books is one way. Another thing is just finding folks online with, like, shared interests and connecting with them. And then somehow we become allies in the fight. But, yeah, it's being willing to see people for who they are, and if they have an expressed interest in some of the work that you want to do, like running with it. Like, oh, you want to do some epic work? Like, yeah, let's talk. But yeah, I mean, I'm a true believer in, like, you find your people. Like, you vibe with the people you vibe with, and then you'll find community. And that's just my method. I don't worry about those who I'm not connecting with.
Gotcha.
I focus more on those who we do have some type of shared interest.
Yeah. You brought up that great stat earlier about, I think what you said, 90% of people in this area, I think, or maybe it might be everywhere. They go to work and maybe they work with somebody. A white person works with somebody, a person of color or people of color, and then that's it. That's the experience.
Right.
There's nothing else beyond that. What about that though? How important do you feel it is to change that number, to make it whatever number we can end up being. Maybe it's 100% the other way eventually. But what about that? What's the call to action there for people? What do you say?
I mean, so for me, it's two different things. It's one, changing the practices to get more people who don't look like you, who don't have your lived experience in your workplace, and that's the work we do at Say Yes. But it's also with these books, even though we are like a Black-owned business, we focus on Black culture. We do call I've had white people ask me, like, are we allowed to come? Like, yes, you're allowed to come. Like, please come. Actually, yeah. But like that's another way, because they're having this conversation, they're reading this book, and they're taking that back to whoever their natural, support system is, or whoever their natural circle is, and they're continuing the conversation. And that's really important because I really believe it's crazy that sounds like literally just having one conversation with someone or connecting with one person that will have a ripple effect, because now you're able to take this message to people who I might not ever meet.
What about Buffalo? You're a lifelong Buffalonian, but you read a lot of books. You have sounds like you've had a pretty good worldview. What's Buffalo lacking when it comes to this type of? I mean, we can talk about the numbers, but what's lacking on a person-to-person basis?
Honesty, I think, in a lot of conversations. I think we walk a lot of lines that we don't need to walk anymore. Like, it's okay to, like, I have really honest conversation with folks, and it's from a place of just like my own lived experience and just being vulnerable versus I think sometimes we're afraid of honesty because we're afraid of offending, and it's just like sometimes you might be a little offended by what I'm saying, but I always tell people, like, sit with that, don't run away from it, like actually figure out, like, okay, what did she say that triggered me, and like how do I dig into that and figure out why, and then what do I do about it next? Right. So I think there's a lot of honesty missing, and I think there are a lot of amazing younger professionals who have amazing ideas and are willing to put in the work, but they often don't get the chance to lead things.
Really?
So I think this community could do better with embracing younger leadership and newer ideas. I'll leave that there without going too far.
I like the way you said that.
We need a mix. Of course, we need
Sure.
the folks who have been in the fight and they know, we need their knowledge, but we also need that innovation that comes with, a fresher perspective.
Are you encouraged by the young people that you're meeting?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah?
All the time.
What do you hear? What do you see? I mean, you're still young. But,
Yeah,
you're not. Well, when you're sitting in this room, you're young.
I'm getting auntie status, but yeah. I'm encouraged by how willing they are to just be themselves. One, I know for me and my peers, we definitely drank the Kool-Aid of you have to conform in order to get into the door and stay in the door. And you see young people who are just authentically themselves, not just in how they look, but in how they speak and their values. And I just think that is like so encouraging, and I think it's amazing. And they are transforming the spaces that they're in. And just, this Gen Z that's the first generation that had the internet their whole lives.
Right.
They've seen a lot more than we did at their age. So
That's for sure.
A lot of things they already know, they're just not willing to tolerate it anymore. And I just think that's incredible. They're willing to push and say, that framework doesn't serve me or serve us. Like, let's create something new.
That's a great perspective.
Yeah.
That's the most encouraging thing I think I've heard in a long time.
Yeah.
What about the other side of the coin, though? What's pushing back against it? What do you do? Is there something? Are there trends or conversations, whether they're local or national, that are the other way? This scares me. This is coming, and this is not good news.
Yeah, I think nationally we've seen, folks afraid of losing power and being decentered. And that's a big thing. Like, we talk a lot about decentering whiteness, and it's not that white people and your experiences and perspective doesn't matter. It's just the fact that none of us were ever centered. Like, we all deserve to be in a center. So we're asking you, like, crack that open and let the rest of us in. I think people are really afraid of that.
Right.
Yeah.
And to the people that are afraid of that, that's a great way of saying it. Beyond the idea that just be nice and
we get
break
that
up
a lot.
your power, but
Yeah.
what is the other part of it? If we can break that mold, what can we picture that's better? I mean, you know what I mean? That aspirational idea that, it's. I mean, the old cliche that I've heard forever is, all ships rise with the rising tide.
Right.
Right. What about that?
I mean, I think people are afraid of losing. I'm going to lose what I understand, the sense of security, or maybe some wealth. And I mean, that is the truth, though. You are going to lose something when we're talking about making things equitable for everyone.
Right.
Because when you think about it, white people have access and wealth and power that wasn't supposed to just be there. It was supposed to be shared.
Everybody's right.
Right. So when you think about it that way, you might lose a little something in this. However, we have to be more concerned with the whole, like, right, as a society, like we need to be thinking of how we benefit from everyone having more.
Well stated. Right. That's okay. Excellent.
And we would, like, when you think about even just wealth alone, like the homelessness and everything, like that impacts everybody. It might,
incarceration.
Yeah, right. That.
Yeah, there's all sorts of costs.
Society as a whole improves when everyone has more and everyone is safer and respected and has equal access to health. I mean, we can go down any rabbit hole, but
right.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate you opening up those rabbit holes for me. Stephanie Peete with me for a few more minutes here on what's next. Stephanie's with Say Yes Buffalo, but we also get a chance to talk to her as co-owner of Second Chapter Bookstore. Let's just talk books for a little while here as we go. I know. Okay, so we talk about White Rage, which is right here in front of us. I offered how the word is passed before, but let's just talk about some favorite books and maybe some recommendations. What flashes to mind for you?
Ooh.
Huh?
It depends on the subject, but there's a lot of things
let's throw a subject out. Let's just start history.
How to be anti-racist is fantastic. I highly recommend that. I mentioned Carol Anderson. She's written a few books. She's an amazing scholar, and what I love about her is sometimes reading about nonfiction, especially like history, can get like super heavy.
Yes.
Those books are super dense. She gets in and gets out in a way that I think is very accessible.
Yeah.
Her books are usually under 200 pages. She gives you context. She relates it to right now. She gives you history, and then she's done. And she moves on to another subject. And I think it's important to have books like that where it's not overwhelming and people can not be intimidated by the book.
Okay.
One book that I've read, not recently, but it comes to mind is his name is George Floyd. I think it's a phenomenal book, and I think everyone should read it. I was actually gifted that book. And despite, again, the density, I couldn't put it down. It was a fantastic, they used his life and the life of his family, so his entire lineage, to show how his family, his entire lifeline was impacted by anti-Black racism, from land theft to over-policing and incarceration. Like it's a phenomenal book. Highly recommend it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Novels. Would you read? What's the most recent novel you read?
I read a lot, so I can't remember the last
okay,
one.
But yeah,
Memphis by Tara Strangefellow was really good.
What's that about?
It's about a story about a woman and her daughters, and also how she grew up. Very focused on women, the book is, but it touches on domestic violence and generational trauma, and her daughter who is able to overcome and live a life that she's designed for herself. Not one that she felt forced into, which so many Black women do end up feeling that way. Sing Unburied Sing by Jasmine Ward is fantastic. It's an older book. It came out a few years ago. Loved it. But yeah, I can go on and on about. I tend to lean towards Black female writers.
Sure.
But
what about classics? Like something that's maybe a little bit older?
The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I've started reading Maya Angelou's her entire series of her autobiography. Everyone thinks about, I Know Why a Caged Bird Sings, but I think there's 6 or 7 in the full collection. So I think I'm 3 or 4 down. So that's a goal of mine, to read her entire life story, because she's phenomenal. But yeah.
You mentioned The Bluest Eye, and when you did, it reminded me actually of what actually kind of prompted us to reach out to initially, book banning.
Yeah.
And Bluest Eye.
Oh, yeah, it's one of the most banned. Yeah. That and Beloved. Yeah.
What do you say to people that I can, I don't spend a ton of time on Facebook. I do recall my wife sending along something to me, reading a passage from Bluest Eye, and how it was being utilized. A small passage in a book that has been acclaimed
Mm-hmm.
to try to ban it in our school district.
Yeah.
Talk.
I think,
I'm going to give you the platform here.
yeah, I think people, whenever you see a book ban, buy those books on it and read why they don't want you to read them. Give them as gifts, share them. I think it's really important. This is nothing new. Like, this is banning books.
It just feels, but it
It
has
feels
a certain
new
feel to it.
because
does.
we have social media and it's in our face
Yeah.
so much. But it's nothing new. Like, the first book was banned in 1637
Right.
in the colonies, and it was criticizing the Puritan government. Like that, right? Like, there
Right.
you go.
Right.
Criticizing the government. We don't
Yeah, I
want
used to
you
keep a picture at my desk
Right.
of a book burning in California of John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, which
Right.
obviously, again, is a well-accepted classic
Right.
now.
Absolutely.
But,
Yeah.
so you're right about that.
The first nationally banned book was the Uncle Tom's Cabin, because they were worried about it causing like a slave rebellion. Like, it's nothing new. But what I feel is most challenging about, what I feel most angry about the book banning is what it's doing to kids, because it's easy for me as an adult to say, okay, well, I can just do what I want to do. I can read whatever I want. I have access. But so many kids, like in school, in their libraries in school, that might be their most consistent access point to books. So by banning them in the schools and dismantling what libraries are supposed to be. I remember I used to skip class in high school. My mother's not going to like this. In my math class, I used to skip it. It was IB Math 1. Don't know what that means. But I used to skip my math class, and I would actually go in the library and I would just read.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So it was like, though I was doing something I wasn't supposed to do, it was still like this haven for me, and being able to select books off the shelf and just sit down and read. And like, the fact that people are trying to destroy that for kids, we should be deeply troubled by that, and we should be acting more.
What about, I have this picture of you at Cine Honors, skipping out of your math class and going to the library and reading. It'd be great to have more kids like that. How do you win the argument, or not? You probably don't win the argument when it comes to talking to kids about reading books. What do you say to them?
I think it's so important for you to nurture it younger. Like, the earlier, the better. When you can get it, when they're babies and it's picture books, to get them excited around reading and to make it like a regular part of your home life, so that it doesn't feel like something they're being forced to do.
Right.
I think a lot of kids look at it as a chore versus a luxury. It really is a luxury, and it is an opportunity to, broaden your worldview. And there's something like, there's health benefits. There's so much good that comes from reading, but I think a lot of it is kids have to see parents and people in their families reading it, and they have to make it part of, the home life in some way or fashion to really get them to see the value in it and to normalize it.
Stephanie, Peete, we're winding down here. I haven't asked this question in a while. We used to ask you quite a bit. I think I know this, but you're obviously very committed to the things that you're into here. But are you hopeful? Are you optimistic?
I am, because if not, then it's a hard life to live. I focus on the things that we see changing and whatever small wins that we...
Do we see small wins?
Yeah, I think when we see employers who are saying, you know what, yeah, we're going to change policies, when we see young people thriving in workplaces, when I see repeat people come to our book events and bring folks, and I've actually met friends. It's hard to make friends as an adult. I've met friends through these events, and people sharing the book and saying, I bought it for a friend, and talking about it publicly. I think a lot of times people will talk privately about a book like this, but to see people like sharing it on their social media and say, yeah, like, I read this, I think other people should read this. I think that's really powerful. And, you have to focus on those little small things you're doing in your immediate community, because that's the ripple effect. And, we tend to think you have to be famous or a celebrity in order to really impact change, but you're changing things in your immediate community, and those changes are powerful. So you have to focus on the good. You can't be consumed by what you're not able to immediately tackle.
I could see if you're involved and your friends are involved, I could see these book discussions being pretty lively.
Yeah, they are. I mean, they're a great time. So check us out.
Yeah, so
come to some of the next ones.
Well, right now there's nothing scheduled, but
we're doing a coffee chat on November 18th. We're talking about Gabrielle Union's latest book. You Got Anything Stronger? It's a collection of essays, and she talks about a lot of things. Infidelity, just challenging the system as a Black woman, raising children, and one of their kids being trans. So yeah, she has a really great perspective on a lot of things.
So it's the 18th at Unapologetic Coffee?
Yep, Unapologetic Coffee,
on Main
and
Street?
it is free. Yep.
What time?
9:30 to 11 a.m.
Oh, bright and
on
early
the 18th.
in the morning.
Yeah, I'm an early bird. I don't. So then we try not to interrupt people's day. Saturdays are busy. Hopefully you can carve out some time in the morning before all of your other activities.
Gotcha.
And yeah.
Gotcha. Wow. Well, I mean, best of luck again. Stephanie Peete is the Director of Workforce Development at Say Yes to Education of Buffalo. Sorry about that. Can't remember my own writing sometimes. And also co-owner of Second Chapter Bookstore with your mother.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, check it out. And if you love books, this is the way to do it. And I love this conversation.
Thank you. Me too.
Thank you for being with us. This has been What's Next on WBFO and WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLN Olean, and WUBJ Jamestown, your NPR station.